Welcome back. Today we're talking about reading comprehension. Now this is a skill that we tend to take for granted, but to somebody in upper elementary school or middle school, they're learning it for the first time. They're being introduced to it. They're reading something and then asking themselves, what was the main point? What was supporting facts? What were the supporting facts? And of course, reading is the gateway to writing. And so when they write, they're asking themselves the same questions. What am I trying to say? What examples am I going to use? It's a really important moment of growth for any student. Now, as I teach students this skill, they oftentimes take to it very easily. But there are those students that truly struggle. And today I'd like to offer you, either as a teacher or as the parent of this student, a technique that will really help the student break through and digest what they've just read and comprehend it. So let's begin. I've always been impressed with people's really good memory. I certainly don't have that. One of the ways to gauge somebody's memory is through this competition where they memorize decks of cards. Now, I would never be able to achieve this, but it did get me thinking. Cards are really meaningless pieces of information. And so if you can memorize them, and if you do have a system of memorizing them, then that could be used with other things. Now, it's different for everyone, but I know for me, I tend to see the world as kind of like a movie in my head. And so I want the information that I digest to be like how I think. And so what I did was I made cards into a story, regardless of where the cards are. Now, let me give you an example. So I have for you here a Jack of Hearts, an Ace of Clubs, and a Five of Spades. So I did this experiment and I asked my student, okay, please memorize that. And I was dead quiet for like 30 seconds and they did fine. And then we did it again. And this time I wasn't so quiet and I talked to them and they couldn't remember it. But then when I introduced the same cards as a story, then they memorized it even if it was 3 minutes later. I asked them and then I waited until the end of the lesson and I said, hey, what were those cards? And they knew it because they actually digest the information instead of just letting it sit on a shelf in their mind. So for these cards, what we can do is we can say, okay, the Jack loves, so not the Jack, but make him just Jack Jack. Jack loves to ace his Irish history test, each time scoring 5 points higher than his friend. Jack from the Jack of card, the Jack, loves the heart to ace, that's ace. His Irish is the club sign. It makes me think of Ireland. And his history test scoring 5 points higher. The 5 is that number, and then the higher is because I think a spade looks like an upward arrow. So there you have it. You have to get really creative, but everybody is going to have a different story, and that's what makes it really useful. It's completely meaningless information, but it becomes meaningful when you connect it into a story, which can be a movie in your head. All right, let's try something a little bit tougher this time. Okay, so after we've mastered memorizing cards, we need to move on. And what I like to do is I like to give my students random facts, as random as possible, because we need to practice the actual skill of telling a story, making this story. And the reason we need to practice the skill is because we need all of the points to actually connect and be meaningful. When they don't, you notice it. So, for example, I make a story. I saw a man running down the street. He saw a boy. Okay, now I have to remember the man running and him seeing the boy. I'm doing more work. However, if I change the story slightly and I say, I saw a man running down the street and he almost tripped over the boy sitting in the road. This is easier to remember because you don't expect the boy to be sitting there. The boy and the man are connected. You can't have the man almost trip without there being a boy there. Also, there's some type of kind of quirkiness or novelty to the story. It needs to be a little weird so that you remember it. The original facts aren't strange, so if you make them strange, you remember them easier. Many people say in any type of memorization, the weirder the better, or the funnier the better. We all remember jokes, and there's a reason why. So, at this stage, I just give my students some random facts. And for you today, I have an old man, a broken car, and a ring selling for $12. And I've connected them together in a meaningful way. I wrote, the old man drove a car, broken and older than him. He could not fix it. He could not even buy a $12 ring for his 12-year-old granddaughter. Now, I've written this for you, but of course the student would just say it to themselves because this is not a storytelling exercise. It's just a way to digest the information into your mind. So, notice here, not only is it unexpected, you don't expect the old man to not be able to even afford a $12 ring, but I've also kind of reinforced some ideas. I have an old man and an old car. I have a $12 ring and a $12-year-old, granddaughter. So the goal of the story is to install the information, to digest the information without making your mind work even harder to remember even more. Now that we thoroughly understand this idea of storytelling, we need to apply it to some actual reading. We need to take a reading passage and see how it applies. Whenever I have a student do a reading, I always want them to read it through themselves first. And I ask them, okay, what words do you not understand? Normally I get one or two words, but then we read it together. I read it out loud, and I ask them occasionally, okay, what does this word mean? And they inevitably say, I don't know. And then we make sure that we understand all the words 100%. After this, I say, okay, what is the passage about? And if they basically give me no feedback at all, we're going to go through the passage again, and we're going to simplify each sentence into a language that they understand. Then I will ask them again and hopefully get a better feedback. The last step is definitely this system of creating a story. We're going to take the main points, we're going to take the main point and a conflicting point and then an example and do something with those. Whenever I read, I always try to take the main point, something either complementary or antithesis to that point, and an example, and I move on from there. So, let's look at an example. The passage that we're going to be reading today was taken from a reading comprehension summary exercise, which is readily available online, and I will link it below. It is about ninjas. Now, let me read this through, and then we're going to pull out those points and tell that story. The image of the ninja wearing all black is a popular one indeed, but there is really no evidence that ninjas ever wore such a costume. In fact, it is much more likely that ninjas dressed as regular civilians, which would have been far more effective camouflage in most situations than all black suits. The use of disguises amongst ninja is common and well documented. Ninja often dressed as monks, entertainers, fortune tellers, merchants, or farmers. Each of these disguises carried advantages that dressing in all black did not. Dressed as monks, ninjas could conceal weapons in their robes. Dressed as entertainers, they could spy in enemy buildings without arousing suspicion. And while dressed as farmers, ninjas carried simple gardening tools such as sickles or trowels and used them as deadly weaponry. In this way, if a ninja were caught by the authorities, he could claim that his deadly apparatus were tools, not weapons. Though they may not have been wearing all black stealth suits, ninjas were always well disguised. All right, so the main point is that ninjas dressed as regular civilians. The antithesis, the contrary point, is that ninjas all wear black, and that's what we think. The example is dressed as a farmer. So I want to make a story, and I want it to be something that's unexpected and a little funny or quirky. And so I thought of a mom taking her teenage ninja son shopping. And he says, Mom, all of my friends are wearing black. I want to buy this shirt. And then the mom says, No, 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 you need to look like a normal person. We're all just a bunch of farmers here. We live on a farm. I want you to buy this shirt. Okay, so it's rather funny and not very authentic, but it's a way of just working through these facts that don't always want to connect and making them connect. If you're reading a large passage with many paragraphs, this method helps you to just digest and move on, digest and move on. You don't have to think, oh, what did it say 2 paragraphs above? You just kind of follow the flow of what you've been thinking in your mind, and your mind does a lot of the work for you. So there you go, there you have it. We've gone through the 3 main stages of this technique, and now I hope that you are ready to apply it with your student or with your child and see the results and really make up that breakthrough that you need so you can read better and more exciting and more difficult things. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week. Bye.